Okay, hello, Jackie Torrens. Who came up with the title for your documentary? Bernie Langille wants to know what happened to Bernie Langille.
Bernie Langille.
Langille, okay, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who came up with the title Bernie Langille wants to know what happened to Bernie Langille? That was me. We actually started this project as a short film in 2018 because when I say we, I'm referring to my production partner, Jessica Brown. She produced the film. We have a company called Peak Media. It's based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And when we came up with the idea to tell this story and to tell it using miniatures, we decided we should do a short film first as a proof of concept. And we called the short film Bernie Langille Wants to Know Who Killed Bernie Langille. And then because we took that great title that was used already, we decided to do a slight variation for the feature. So Bernie Langille Wants to Know What Happened to Bernie Langille. And then seems metaphorically apt.
It's a funny title. I like it. It definitely sticks out.
It's really long, but hopefully it's memorable.
That's true. It is quite long. Okay, so how did you become aware of this story?
Well, I think it was 2016. I was on Twitter one night, and a man named Bernie Langille just started tweeting out a series of tweets to the public saying, my grandfather died under odd circumstances about a half century ago, and I wonder if there's anybody out there who could help me find out what happened to him.
Hmm.
And as I had been looking for a story, actually, with which to use the concept of using miniatures with. And I had been in particular looking for a subversive story to use that concept for. And I was very taken by this man who was making this public appeal so he could solve a family event that had happened so long ago. So I contacted him, like I do a lot as a documentarian when I see something that piques my interest. And I just said, would you like to come meet with me? I'm a storyteller. Would you like to come meet with me? And he said yes, as people often do, which is great. Yeah.
Were you kind of worried? You're meeting this rando on Twitter. Were you ever worried about your security?
No, I met in a public place, in the middle of the
Good.
day. And, Halifax isn't that a big of a city, a small city. So, it turned out after the fact that we were already connected through different series of people in Halifax. And so, no, I went and met him at a coffee shop. I was more, for me, once I met him and once I heard him tell the story, I kind of made the offer to him of, are you interested in this becoming a documentary story? And it's up to that person to say yes or no. So I was glad when he said yes, he was into it. And it's been a 5-year process. So he made quite a commitment of his time to be part of it.
5 years. And what stood out with the tweets?
I think the plea for help, and also just the number of strange events that happened to his grandfather in one night, and the fact that half a century later, this grandson who was named after this man who had never met the person he was named after was so affected by this half-century-old event that there he was one night on Twitter making a public appeal. And I think I was also struck by the fact that, that this was a family story that had been handed down to him, like a dark family fable almost. And we all have family narratives that are passed down to us, family narratives that usually we only kind of know pieces and fragments of. And it's great when they're positive, but when they are negative and traumatizing, they can emotionally freeze you in time, which is exactly what happened to this family.
And there, because he had I'm trying to remember, an uncle who was quite consumed with this story as well, right?
Yes, Bernie Sr. and Annie, his wife, had 3 sons and adopted another son, and one son was named Larry, and he ended up. He was so obsessed with the case of finding out of what had happened to his grandfather, and he was pretty convinced it was a military cover-up and that the government was behind what had happened to his father. And he was so obsessed with it that ultimately his whole life was dedicated to it. He didn't do much else besides try and find out what had happened to his father. And I think that also speaks to, this family had a loved one taken from them in a bizarre series of unfortunate events, and no answers were given to them at the time. So Bernie Langille, who was a military engineer on the base of Gagetown, he had friends over one night, or he went out drinking, and his wife woke up in the middle of the night with his head bashed in. And then after that, he was taken to the ER in Oromocto, where one surgeon said he immediately needed to be flown to Halifax to be seen for surgery. And the doctor who was supposed to implement those orders left and went on lunch. And it was 5 hours before. So you've got someone with a skull fracture. So it was 5 hours before the emergency flight was suddenly reorganized and happened. He also then was struck by a military doctor. He was assaulted by a military doctor while he was waiting to be transported to Halifax. When he gets to Halifax, the ambulance that's transporting him to the Halifax hospital gets hit by a train. He eventually gets seen in Halifax and operated on, but it's too late by then, and he dies. And the only investigation that was done at the time, there was 2 boards of inquiry by the military done. And boards of inquiry by the military are done by the military for the military, and their findings are not made public. So it was another 25 years before the family even found out what had gone on in the board of inquiry and what the military had concluded, which was essentially this was a no-fault event of this man falling down the stairs. And sure, the stuff that happened with the military afterwards wasn't helpful to Mr. Langille, but they eschewed taking any responsibility. And so I think, when anybody is left with a tragedy and left with no answers, things fester in the dark. And that's certainly what happened to this family.
Definitely. Did you feel a certain sense of responsibility with the story, since it meant so much for some family members?
Yes, I certainly did. I mean, as a documentarian, you have a real responsibility towards your participants. And it's interesting, Bernie Langille himself, he talks about having kind of a remoteness to the event because he never met his grandfather, and it happened to his grandfather before he was even born. And then because of that, it was really important to speak to some of the family members who had actually been there. And when we did go and speak with a couple of Bernie's uncles, it was really evident that even bringing this all up again was quite triggering. And so, yes, I certainly did feel a responsibility to go about this as best as I could and with as much trust and respect as I could. And at the same time, the doc is about Bernie Jr. himself having these questions. And so we tried to answer his questions as best as we could, and we took him on this journey. And sometimes you find things out and the truth hurts. So you can be in this position where you're getting truth that you didn't necessarily expect to get. And also it's interesting with family stories, they really, even when we don't know the full story, what we do know really becomes cemented. We get very attached to the family stories that we are told, and it's difficult to change the story when we get new information, because the story we have been told and that we decide on, in a way, becomes a part of our identity. So I know Bernie Jr. himself was concerned that he might dig up information that would fill in the blanks, but that might be information his family didn't necessarily want to hear.
That's really interesting. Yeah, we do get tied to certain narratives.
Yes.
Was there any sense of closure for the family seeing this documentary?
The family has not seen it yet. They will be seeing it. They will be seeing it this month before it airs at Hot Docs. They did see the short that we did. I am hoping, I think part of the journey of doing the documentary, although, the story is about Bernie Jr. himself and his search, other family members were involved. And I think just being part of that has already brought about some closure and some healing. And so hopefully seeing the documentary, which, is about Bernie's ultimate realization. It's a film that kind of starts as if it's a true crime film, but essentially morphs along the way to become an existential investigation about family stories and intergenerational trauma. So I do think there's been healing for the family in participating, and I'm
Mm.
hoping that there will be healing for the family when they watch the documentary.
I bet there will be. I bet there will be.
I hope so.
Okay, so tell people a little bit about the creator's decision to use the miniatures, because I thought that was really neat.
Oh, cool. I'm glad you like that.
Yeah.
So actually the idea to do a documentary using miniatures as reenactments came to me almost 10 years ago now, when I did a documentary for CBC Radio on a group of miniaturists that come from all over the world and meet for 5 days every year in Nova Scotia. And
Mm.
I had gone to do a documentary about that. And I was very fascinated, as many people are, with miniatures, this idea of this art form that replicates real life in smaller size. And at the same time, I was also taken with the fact that often miniatures are dismissed as
Mhm.
something in the world of childhood, or a suitably sweet feminine pursuit, shall we say.
Aw,
And
no.
this is an underappreciated art form in my view. And there's a lot of craftsmanship that goes into it. And so as soon as I saw what the miniatures were creating and how they created, I went to a few of them and I said, I would like to do a documentary story using miniatures for the reenactments. If I find one, are you in? And these were people who actually had never done anything for film or television before. They were hobby miniaturists who had actually quite often had their hobby kind of dismissed.
Yeah.
Um, so they were all for it, especially the idea of using miniatures in a subversive sense.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the idea, because this is a story that Bernie himself wasn't ever present for, but grew up with,
Mm.
suddenly when I heard the Bernie story, I thought, this is the story that this idea has been meant for. And so the miniaturist artists, Shelley Acker and Iris Sutherland, came on board, and they created 18 different sets for us based on
Mm.
the Langille family history, their homes, and the military bases at the time. And it also was the idea to use miniatures. I think not only is it visually interesting and makes the film have a kind of surreal quality to it,
Mm.
um, there's also great practical reasons for using the miniatures. We couldn't go back to 1968, but we could recreate it in miniature. And that's what the miniaturists did by combing through the material that the Langille family had provided us, pictures and home movies, to recreate Larry's apartment. The the uncle who ends up dying, for instance, that's one of my favorite sets. We only had a home movie that was pretty shaky and decades old, and wouldn't really show a whole lot of the apartment. So Iris and Sutherland like combed through that home video to find little bits and glances of, oh, there's a table over there, it looks like this. Oh, there's a picture over there, it looks like this. So that when that set was recreated, the first time Bernie Jr. saw it, he had actually been in that apartment as a child, and he was stunned and said, it looks just
Mm.
like my Uncle Larry's apartment. And then, you know, we can't get on a military base, certainly not in private access to the parts they don't want us in. And we can't go back to a military base in 1968, but we can recreate it. So the miniatures also were great in the sense that they solved a lot of pragmatic issues for us.
Nice. That's great. Like I was just taken with the surrealness of it, and it is a good way to sort of, like, we know this is something else now. This is a perspective, or we're revisiting something or recollecting it. So totally worked for me. I really enjoyed it,
Uh,
and nice to have all that backstory there. That's great. So, are you excited to be in Toronto for the Hot Docs Film Festival to unleash this project?
yes, I'm totally excited
Yeah.
for a couple of reasons. It's, you know, we've been living in a pandemic. It's going to be
Mm.
great to bust out of the East Coast and
Mm.
go up to Toronto for sure. But also because, you know, this idea we made as a short film, and we took it up as a short film to Hot Docs in 2018 with the
Nice.
express goal of getting ourselves a deal,
Mm.
make a feature. And that's, you know, the plane basically just landed, and we were immediately commissioned by the doc channel to make a feature of the film. And then we started work immediately, but we were only a few weeks into shooting before we basically got shut down by the pandemic. And so we were shut down for 3 months, and then we resumed filming. So largely, I would say like 98% of this film has been made in the pandemic. So to finally be able to bring the feature back to Hot Docs, that started as a short film. It's a full circle moment for me, for sure.
That's great. And have you been told what the festival will be like via COVID protocol this year?
I think from what I understand, it will be a hybrid festival. So some of it will
Mm,
be in person and some of it will be online.
mhm.
And that's fine with me. And we'll go up and be as COVID safe as we possibly can. Many of our team are going to be up there. Our director of photography, our production manager, the two miniaturists themselves, Shelley and
Ah,
Iris, will be up there. Our executive producer will be up there. My producer, Jessica Brown, will also be there. And I will be there. So there will be quite a showing from the Bernie Langille team.
that's great. And of course, you want to show it to an audience. You want to be
Yes.
there for that.
Yes, absolutely. It's so interesting to because when you work on a story, especially when you're the director, you're there from the first initial idea to the very end, and you go through
Mhm.
different stages with the film. You're in pre-production, production, and post, and a lot of the times you're working on things by yourself. So the chance to actually finally sit down in a theater and see it with people and get that sense of their energy and be able to find out what they react to and what they respond to, that's going to be very exciting and also just very informative for me. So I'm looking forward to it.
Nice. So I felt like, despite all the information in the documentary, it was very emotional and dramatic. And I feel like that's sort of lacking sometimes in documentaries where it's more detached and talking heads. So what are your thoughts on that, like from a filmmaking point of view?
I'm really glad to hear you had that
Mhm.
experience, actually, because it's in the end we don't solve the mystery, but the film
Right.
is actually not about that. The film is about a person trying to find out more information about
Mhm.
this story that has kept their family emotionally frozen in time.
Mhm.
So I mean, really what the film is about is intergenerational trauma in families.
Mhm.
So I'm glad that you felt moments of emotion and drama, and especially because Bernie himself has been so affected by this event that he wasn't even
Mhm.
born for. Um, that he himself is pretty stoic and plays his cards pretty close to his chest. I mean, at one point in the film, he talks about that he makes a realization that there was so much emotion that he grew up with that really there was no room for him to have emotion or to show emotion. And I
Mhm.
thought that was an important revelation that he had
Mhm.
on this journey that he went on with us. So his decision, I mean, during filming, he went from being a single man who was just divorced to dating this woman who eventually he becomes engaged to, who becomes his
Mhm.
wife, and they ended up having their baby in the middle of the pandemic. So the fourth generation of Langilles was being born as we were making this film, and it put Bernie in a position of having to make a decision with this story that he grew up with. Was he going to be passing the story on, or what choice was he going to be making?
Jeez. That's big right there. And we're gonna end on that note. Jackie, thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it. What do you have planned for the rest of the year before I let you go?
I am actually with my company. We're working on a western,
Oh my
so
God.
I will be playing that.
Well,
So
that's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, we have a genre in common that we really like. So that's what we'll be
Absolutely.
working on, as well as more documentary ideas.
Okay, well, good luck for it. We'll stay tuned to your Western.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your interest in Bernie Langille.
My pleasure.